There is a question Nigerians keep asking, and it sounds different every few years. Different faces, different scandals. But at its core, it is always the same question. Is the Senate working for Nigeria? Or working for the man at Asuro? Right now, that question has a name attached to it. Senator Godswill Akpabio. But before you make up your mind about whether this is Nigeria's weakest Senate since democracy returned in 1999, I need you to sit with something first. Because if this pattern looks familiar, it may be because you have seen it before. And in all honesty, we all have. Welcome to the Pivot Report, your destination for deep political analysis, geopolitics, political history, and global affairs. We break down the forces shaping nations, explain major political development, uncover historical context, and analyze global power shift from elections and diplomacy to conflict. Our mission is simple. We go beyond headline and explain what really matters. So please subscribe and be part of this family. Let's start with what is actually happening. Godswill Akpabio, former governor, Akwa Ibom State, former minister, Niger Delta Development. He presides over Nigeria's 10th Senate at this moment. And since he took that gavel, a significant portion of the Nigerian public has had a problem with how he's using it. The criticism are loud and specific. Critics say the Senate has been too quick to approve executive requests without meaningful pushbacks, too quiet on matters where citizens expected noise. Others say it's too aligned with the presidency of Bola Tinubu at the time, when ordinary Nigerians are observing one of the most painful economic adjustments in a generation. Fuel subsidy removal, naira devaluation, inflation running wide. And some of these moments that fueled this narrative were not subtle. Controversial appointments sailed through. Contentious policies received legislative blessings with minimal floor debate. Public disagreement within the chamber, when they happen, often seems more about personal grievances than institutional principle. What most people don't realize is that none of this is happening in a vacuum. There are not just the these are not just the failing of one man. They reflect a structural question Nigeria has been avoiding for 25 years. The Senate independence is not just about politics. It is the economic oxygen supply of accountability. When oversight weakens, policy errors go unchallenged and ordinary citizens pay the price. So, if you've been watching Nigerian politics wondering whether things are getting better or worse, this is the video for you. Like and subscribe so you never miss a context like this. Also, tell me in the comments if Nigeria is actually getting better or worse. Let's continue. Here's where the story changes, and this is the part most analysts skip. Nigeria has been here before, repeatedly. Cast your mind back to the early 2000s. President Olusegun Obasanjo, former military head of state, democratically elected in 1999, had a complicated relationships with the National Assembly, to say the least. He clashed with Senate President Evan Huerem and Shuba Okadigbo. Both were eventually removed. When Adolphus Wabara took over, allegations of budget padding and executive interference trailed his tenure until he too resigned under pressure. Then came the Yaradua years, quieter, but the executive legislative dynamics remained uncomfortable. Under Jonathan as well, the National Assembly periodically flexed, but critics argue the overall direction still bent towards presidential preference when it mattered most. And then Bukola Saraki. This is the comparison that matters most right now. When Saraki defied President Buhari preferred candidate in 2015 to elect himself Senate President, Nigerians were briefly electrified. Here, finally, was an independent legislature pushing back. The tension was real. The drama was genuine. But here is the uncomfortable truth historians note. Much of Saraki's defiance was also about political survival and personal positioning, not purely institutional independence. So even the Senate we remember as bold had its own complicated motivations. Every generation of Nigerians has inherited the same Senate debate. The question is not whether Akpabio is worse than his predecessor. It is whether Nigerian constitutional design makes independence structurally difficult for any Senate president to sustain. A recurring political pattern appears to be this. In Nigeria, the Senate is most independent when the Senate president has the least to lose. Think about it. Saraki was already in conflict with the executive. He had nothing to gain from compliance, so he had the incentive to confront. When Senate leaders are politically close to the sitting president, when their political futures depends on that relationship, deference becomes, rational, not heroic. Rational. There's a second pattern. Public anger rises fastest on Senate performance during economic crisis. In 2002, during Obasanjo's second term, in 2016 under Buhari recession, and now as Tinubu reform agenda compresses household incomes across every income bracket. It is always the same story. So when people are suffering, they need someone to blame, and the Senate that appears to be sharing from the presidential sideline makes a convenient target. Whether that perception is fully fair is a separate question. The third pattern, and this one should concern every Nigerian, is that these debates almost never result in structural, reforms. We argue about the person, we rarely fix the institution. The names change every 4 years. The institution question never does. So, what is really going on here? The debate about Akpabio Senate may be less about Akpabio, the individual, and more about the structural incentive that shape every Senate president who sits in that chair. Nigerian Fourth Republic was designed with checks and balances on paper, but the political economy, party financing, state capture, executive control of security, and economic levers create powerful informal pressure that no constitutional clause can fully neutralize. For those who support the Senate current posture, the argument is not ridiculous. A cooperative legislature can, in theory, accelerate implementation of policy at a time when Nigerians desperately need execution, not obstruction. But here is where the story changes. The purpose of legislative oversight is not to obstruct governance. It is to prevent governance from becoming governance for the few. And when the oversight mechanism is perceived as absent, even if it is technically present, public trust in democratic institutions corrodes. That corrosion is not loud, it is quiet. It accumulates, and the consequences appear not in this administration or in the next generation relationship with democracy itself. Democratic erosion rarely announces itself. It sweeps in through the gap between what institutions are designed to do and what citizens observe them actually doing. Stay with us. We are about to look at what could actually happen or happen next and what history says about each scenario. So what could happen next? I created 3 scenarios: the redemption hack, the managed tension, and the breaking point. So we're going to be looking at each scenario one after the other. Scenario 1, that's the best case. The Senate begins demonstrating visible independence on issues that matter to Nigerians. Perhaps it pushes back on the controversial bill. Perhaps it holds a public hearing that generates genuine accountability. Public perception shifts, not because of optics management, but because of actual institutional behavior. This would rebuild some credibility, not just for Akpabio, but for the institution itself. Scenario 2, which is the managed tension, is a moderate case. The current balance holds. The Senate cooperates on a large executive priorities, occasionally pushes back on smaller battles. Criticism continues, but the political calculations on both sides makes radical change, unlike Nigeria finishes this administration with the Senate debate unresolved and hands the conversation to the next generation of lawmakers. Scenario 3, the breaking point. I call it the high tension scenario, where a major governance, that deals with a major governance failure, economic, security, or social, triggers public demand for visible legislative accountability. Civil society pressures intensifies. Internal state fractures currently managed behind the scenes become public. This could either force institutions towards genuine reform or accelerate the erosions of confidence in democracy that Nigerian can least afford right now. So, what are the lessons for emerging leaders? What are the lessons for people who intends to go into politics? What are the lessons for people who wants to be accountable to their people? So, if you are a young Nigerian watching this, whether you're in the university, in business, or already in politics, what this moment is teaching you is both uncomfortable and necessary. First, institutions are only as strong as the people inside them are willing to sacrifice for them. Independence is not granted by constitution. It is earned by individuals willing to pay a political price for doing the right thing. Second, the debate about any Senate president is ultimately a debate about political culture. Until Nigerian politics restructures its incentives, until lawmakers can sustain viable political careers without executive patronage, this pattern will repeat itself. Third, as a citizen, your most powerful tool is not outrage on social media. It is informed, sustained pressure on your local representative. This is how democracies, even imperfect ones, bend over time. The Senate is not above you. Please know this. It is by constitutional design answerable to you. The question is whether you hold it to that standard. Only time will tell. So, this is my closing statement. Whether history remembers the Senate as Nigerian weakest or merely one of many that struggle to define its independence will depend on decision not yet made. But this much is already clear. The questions being asked about Akpabio Senate are not new. They are old, they are foundational, and every time Nigerian fails to answer them structurally, it simply defies the reckoning to the next administration. The institution survives, the debate persists, and ordinary Nigerian has always absorbed the consequences of both outcomes. So to understand today politics, you must understand its history, because in Nigerian, perhaps more than anywhere, history is not the past, it is the policy brief. This is where politics meet history. Subscribe to this channel and never let the headline be the only story you know. Thank you for staying with me and engaging with this video. See you in the next video. Bye.